We want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. We're excited. Last week we had three of the couples that went through a tornado and got to share their story of God's hand of providence on their life. And the other couple that got to share in our Sunday in the Park will be sharing today. And so we're excited to have, again, a little bit of an out of the norm podcast and have one that is really more of a testimony basis instead of just diving into Scripture. We'll definitely look at Scripture during this, but we're excited to have Travis and Erika Burns join us today and have a chance to share their story and how God has been faithful tremendously in their life. So how are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Not too bad. I was going to say fresh off of dinner. So like you got some dinner. We're ready to go, have a conversation. Nerves aren't too bad.
Not
I think
too
we'll
bad.
be okay.
Yeah, you'll be okay. I was
We'll
going to
figure it
say, it's, you guys get to just retell a little bit of your story, which is good. We won't do anything awkward about how you met or how you started dating or anything like that. But it'll be a good opportunity to hear what God's been doing in your life recently. So, yeah, I guess share a little bit with us what took place a couple years ago, and I know there's a ton to that, but we can work through as we go of what has taken place and then what has happened since then.
Sure. Do you want to start with
Sure.
what you were doing or what your work is?
Yeah. So I work at a propane company, and middle of winter, it's our busiest time. It's very hard to kind of keep the ball rolling, keep people satisfied, keep customers happy.
Yeah.
And so, often I care a lot about like what I do at work, and I care about the customers. And when things aren't going smoothly, I take that personally.
Yeah.
And so often, I'd be sitting at home and just be not present. And so like the day leading up to that, we're at church and, my mind is racing. I'm thinking about what I have to do tomorrow. I'm thinking about broken vehicles. I'm thinking about, is this going to work? This, how it's all going to play out. And, we're at Grace Church at the time, and Erika can tell that my mind is all over the place. And she's like, you need to just be here.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the day, it seemed like it went pretty well. And
I think that I actually made the comment at one point that we're not guaranteed tomorrow, so be present today, which is really ironic when you think about it.
Yeah.
You say it a million times in life, and then this time it actually meant something, I guess. So glad I said it.
Oh man. Yeah, so my personal counselor's voice is ringing in my ear because that's one of the things he always works with me on is, hey, like you're not being present, that you need to be present in your life and whatever it is you're in. So yeah, we can get distracted pretty easy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so, the rest of the day went pretty well. I woke up in the morning and I had a 50-minute drive to work every day. So often on my way, I was just praying for safety for the drivers and safety for the vehicles and that everything would go smoothly and got to work, things not going smoothly and vehicles are broken and Did
you even hear me, God? Yeah.
Yeah. And it probably was more of like me with my wish list more so than actually listening to what God is saying back. And
and it didn't help that day either because it was like a really cold day.
Yeah, it was like 5 degrees.
Yeah, the high was really low. And so, he had all that added pressure of people being very freaked out about potentially running out of propane.
Yeah.
Which is understandable.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it doesn't mean that it gives them the right to be jerks to those providing the propane. But anyways,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, like Erika said on Sunday, I was just texting back and forth with her, just my frustration about, we're going to have to do this, and there's just a lot of moving parts, and I'm going to have to borrow a truck from one of our other locations in Conneaut Lake, and I'll have to go out and talk to so-and-so to see if they can go pick it up, and how will we coordinate that. So, it started off with the one delivery driver's batteries were dead on his truck, and I'm helping him. It's 5 degrees out. We don't have a garage.
Yeah.
We're pulling these batteries out in the elements, and he's like, I'll be back. I'm just going to go down to wherever and get some batteries. So while he's gone, I go out and I'm talking to those guys in the building. And like I said, I was in there for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. It couldn't have been that long. And just trying to make a plan with one of the other guys. And in that amount of time, that explosion occurred. And, I just remember, I don't remember the explosion itself. Just remember just like a real weird sound. And we all kind of made eye contact for a second. And then I don't remember anything. And then I kind of came to and just felt the heat of the fire on my back.
Yeah.
And I went to push myself up, and it just knocked me right back flat on my stomach. And I could just see there's 2 entrances, or there's an entrance and an exit in the same. And so I could just see the one door was already open, and all I could see was some light.
Yeah.
And I just remember saying, oh God, get me, crying out to God for help to get me out of there. And I don't know how I got out, there's, desks and shelves and everything all kind of piled, and I was able to get out. And the first thing I remember is when I got out, I looked down and my hands were still on fire.
Yeah.
And so I just ran for the closest snowbank and jumped in. And one of the other guys was already out, and he grabbed snow and threw it all on me to try to, take care of it.
Put you out.
Basically. And then, it seemed like an eternity, but then the third guy, all of a sudden he appeared and he got out. And, I didn't, but the other guys were able to shut down all the emergency shut-off stuff so that there was no further, at least imminent harm, or whatever the word is. But, a few minutes passed, and then that driver came back with the batteries thinking, what did I just show up to? And he loaded me up in the truck, and because it seemed as if I was the worst of the 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so kind of ironic too, or maybe not ironic, but just odd that it happened this way. But they were actually, Trav and his guys were actually the first ones to call 911. So they were able to call for themselves and get people in. Meanwhile, we find out later that, a lot of houses and whatnot around also called because it was an audible explosion.
Felt the ground shake, whatever
absolutely.
It was.
And Trav took something to the face and got a cut above his eye, and so he looked like he was in the worst shape because he had been bleeding.
Yeah, it was just, I obviously didn't feel it, but it was just visible. It was just running right down.
So that's why they kind of threw him in the truck with this driver, and sped towards Erie.
Sped across Route 8 towards Erie, and as we're going, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. As we're going, because I was going to ask, I'm not sure if I know the answer to this or not. How conscious were you on that ride to the hospital? Like, were you in and out a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay,
I was in and out since I stepped out of the building. Since I came out of the building,
But I think it was not based on what other people have told me that were involved. It was not. He was not actually physically passing out. He was just not mentally able to process everything that was going on.
What was going on?
Yeah. So he seemed alert and, was going through the motions of oh, this is what I need to do to help myself. But he doesn't have memory of it.
Recalling it, is a different story.
Very hazy. I was basically just kind of a walking zombie. I was upright for whatever reason. As soon as I got the fire out, I called the manager in Conneaut Lake and tried to tell him what happened. And, I remember knowing that I was bleeding at some point because I went like this I'm trying to punch his number in, and
blood's dripping on your phone.
Not too graphic here. Some people don't like this stuff.
But so anyways, kind of upright but not 100% with it. And
which we've kind of said even from those first couple of days in the hospital when he did kind of come back to and understand what was going on, that was a blessing too, that he doesn't have a lot of memory of what happened, and that in those moments he didn't really have the time to feel super terrified, or you were in pain for sure, but it just, the not having the memory of it is kind of better. I think it has helped a lot.
It is. I'm thankful for that because a lot of people that go through that, they have reoccurring nightmares.
So difficult to overcome that.
Yeah, and I haven't had anything like that. I mean, some weird, trippy stuff on pain meds at the hospital, but I think everybody would have that.
Yeah,
but nothing as far as the accident.
They were
goes.
just trying to make life manageable at that point,
Yeah,
so.
But yeah, on the way to the hospital in the vehicle that the guy took to pick up the batteries, riding with him, he's talking to me the whole time, asking me like, hey, you still with me? You still with me? That type of thing. We had a fire truck pass us, and he actually called back. We found this out later too. He called back to the ambulance and said, hey, I saw two people. It's a company vehicle from that location. Guy in the passenger seat looked like he was bad shape.
Yeah.
So we were coming across Route 8, and an ambulance just pulled across in front of us at a distance and stopped.
You. Yeah.
And
and at that point, too, they had shut Route 8 down completely,
Okay.
both directions, because nobody knew, that the propane had been shut off and whatnot yet. So there were two, what did you tell me?
Yeah, and that's the other part of
30,000?
it. It's a miracle that the whole place didn't completely explode, because there's the room that they were filling tanks in is only like 40 feet from two 30,000 gallon propane tanks. And, it very easily, I don't know exactly how it works, but it very easily could have tracked back the pipe.
Absolutely.
But they were able to get the shutoffs on the tank shut, on the belly of the tank to shut so that there was no product coming out of the tanks. But, it very easily could have been a huge crater in the earth instead of just that room.
Which, at that point, there would have been no...
Yeah, it would have...
There would have been no hope for those that were there.
Yeah, I don't know. It probably would be like, I don't know, a quarter mile.
Yeah.
Everything within a quarter mile. And then people further out, the shrapnel from the tanks could probably fly out to a mile,
And that would have been catastrophic.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you get intercepted by the ambulance.
Yep, and, they were talking to me the whole time as they're loading me up. They had said something about, I asked if my airway was okay. I don't know if they didn't want to worry me or anything like that, but they're like, okay, and maybe they're winking at each other like, yeah, he's not okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, you're fine, buddy. You're doing good.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're panicking because of the state you're in.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I remember them putting an IV in as we're running across Route 8, and then I remember somebody saying, we're coming up on 90. And then
that was the last thing you
woke
remembered.
up in Pittsburgh.
So,
yeah.
So from there, and Trav said, I know this is going to come up in the podcast, but we got married and he never changed his emergency contact through work. So they called your best friend first. Who?
Well, you guys had only been married for a couple weeks that time, right?
No.
No. Probably what?
Like
120 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say, or a couple years.
Yeah.
But anyways, I was trying, Travis.
Time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that should have already been taken care of.
She usually handles these things.
Let's be real.
I know.
I didn't think about it.
I was gonna say, yeah.
But so they called.
She didn't tell me to do it, so I didn't
called
do
his
it.
best friend, who is actually the son of the manager that he also called down in Conneaut Lake.
Yeah.
So he knew, and then they called his dad because that was his other emergency contact.
Yeah.
And so I didn't hear about it for a while, and then his dad called me at our house and kind of just briefly said there was an explosion. Trav's going to the hospital. I'm going to come pick you up, call your mom, have her come get Wes or stay with Wes. And I'll take you to Hammett.
Because at the time, Wes was...
Not quite one.
Yeah. I was going to say, I knew that he wasn't quite one
like
yet,
a week shy.
Yeah. Okay.
So called my mom.
Sorry, those that don't know, Wes is their son. Yeah. So
he's this kid that lives with us.
He's a live-in, helps defer the rent costs and stuff. Yeah.
So I called my mom and she came up or packed up and they live an hour away. So there was some processing time going on in there. Meanwhile, this had hit I don't know if it was the news or just I guess police scanners probably at this point.
Okay.
So I actually had friends texting, asking if Travis was okay because they knew it was at that place where he worked. And like, I'm still processing the fact that there was an accident. I know no details. And so, so Wes was still napping twice a day. I put Wes down for a nap, which was an emotional mess because it was sinking in that like I was going to be separated from him and I didn't know what was going on with his dad. And that was really hard in that moment, emotionally for me. And then kind of got some things situated, got some things packed up, and had talked to an old coworker of mine. And she said, it's a good thing that they're only taking him to Hammett, so you don't have to worry, because if it was worse, they would take him somewhere else, a higher trauma center. And so I was like, yeah, that's good. And then like 10 minutes later, I get a call from the trauma surgeon at Hammett, and they're like, yeah, we really can't do anything for him. We need to fly him out. Yeah. So they flew him down to Mercy in Pittsburgh. And so before we made it to Hammett, we were redirected to go south. And so his dad and his mom and I hopped in the car and headed to Pittsburgh. Ironically, his dad had been there before. He'd been burned in 2007.
Okay.
His dad. And so he had been down there for his care as well. A much shorter stay, but was down there. So they kind of had an idea of where they were going, which was a relief. And, the whole drive, we're just making phone calls, asking for prayer, and on the phone with the hospital, both hospitals a couple different times, and trying to figure out insurance and all the fun things that you want to do when you just found out your husband was blown up, basically. So we get down there, and he is, we're allowed to see him, which was cool, but burns, and I didn't know anything about this going into this, but burns are... like people that have been burned are like very susceptible to infection because your skin is like your first layer of defense. And so they like take us in this side room to get prepped to go in to see him. And we're putting on gowns and masks and hairnets and gloves. And I think at that time they had us wear like little booties over our shoes. Over your shoes, too. Yeah. And this is also a COVID time. So there were some precautions already because of that. Because this is January 22.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of part of it as well. But we got to go in. His brother met us there too. His brother lives outside of Pittsburgh. So he met us there as well. And we got to see him. And you just can't be prepared for things like that, Yeah. It was graphic. I mean, it was not graphic in the sense that most of what was injured was covered by a sheet to help with that sterilization. But you don't expect to see your husband lying on a bed, unable to move, intubated, and
no hair, no eyebrows, no eyelashes.
That was strange. Well, you had some eyelashes.
The eyelashes were just kind of welded together.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
It was not pleasant. But he looked like him, and that was a blessing. I mean,
so you at least recognized the fact that you knew that this was Travis.
Yes. Yeah. It looked like him, and.
I mean, there was a lot of swelling. Like my face, my dad told me, he's like, yeah, your face was like 20% bigger. Yeah. But like, it looked like you, but it was definitely.
But it had been fast that they had gotten him to the hospital and then life flighted down. So a lot of that, even by the time we got to him, hadn't swelled up as much yet, actually. Yeah. So over the next couple of days, things started to really, you looked different. Yeah. But we could tell it was him. So that was good. I felt like that was the first step, once we saw him, we could kind of assess. But then we were only with him for maybe 10 minutes, and they're like, you guys got to get out. Like, we got so much prep to do. And at that time too, they didn't know anything about his airway. And so I guess with burns, there's like a risk of smoke inhalation and an internal burn. And one of our friends that's a nurse up at Hammett had basically said, like, if there's an internal burn, there's really not much they can do about it. Yeah. So we had people praying like really hard doesn't really count, but just praying.
I know what you're saying.
Over and over.
Praying fervently.
Yes. Yeah. For that airway to be okay. And so we found out before we went home that night that it was okay. They had done a scope, and there was no burn at all. And
there was not internal burns.
Correct.
Okay.
So that was like one little hurdle that we had overcome at that point, which was really exciting.
Yeah.
And yeah, because of COVID, there were no waiting rooms. So we like all sat in a line of 5 in these like chairs next to the elevator, and like everybody's just coming and going, and we're like, this is terrible. Like, we just need to be in a place where we can process. And at that point it had been on the news, and the things that the news were saying was like really scary, and later we realized not overly accurate because they didn't know, they weren't there. But at the time it was like, oh man, like big explosion, cinder blocks thrown across, for feet, yards. And so anyway, we got to see him a little bit more that night before we left, but it was very touch and go. Like not touch and go on his health, but like come in for 5 minutes, go back out, come in for 20 minutes, go back out. And eventually they were like, you guys just need to go home. So we all rode home, and when I got home that night, my mom was at our house and she stayed with me, and the phone rang at 12:30 from the hospital, and I'm like, this isn't good. Like, why would they call me in the middle of the night? But they just needed permission to do something health-wise that he couldn't get permission for because he was intubated. So
and you remained intubated for how long?
3 days. Monday, he was intubated Monday, and he was extubated Thursday morning.
Okay.
So in that time, he had one surgery, I think, and that's why they decided to keep him intubated for that rather than bring him out and put him back under.
And then put him,
Yeah, but it was strange. It was I don't know what they called it. If it was like a twilight intubation or something. So like the next day I went in, we drove back to Pittsburgh that next morning. I went in, and he was sitting up, like with his eyes open. But he couldn't speak because he was still intubated. And he was bandaged at that point, so he couldn't move anything. They actually had his like arms tied down to the bed, so he couldn't pull
the intubation out, the tube out,
do anything, or hurt your skin in any way, or what was left of your skin in any way.
Do you remember that?
Very vaguely. I remember I'm not even sure what day it was. I just remember trying to write. Because I wanted to talk and I couldn't talk.
And you couldn't talk.
I'm trying to write, and I don't even know what I was trying to write. She might remember.
Terrible. Yeah.
I was trying to write something, but I'm back like this, and so you're writing like this, and so I'm just writing letters on top of letters.
Yeah.
And then he'd get frustrated because we couldn't understand what he was saying. But
yeah,
it was hard. That was not fun to see him like that, and know that he's trying, but he doesn't really know that he's trying so hard, and he got frustrated and he would cry, and it was just not good. Ironically, and I say this just as some comedic relief here, I took a book down to read to him, and within the first like 3 chapters of the book, the main character is talking about how her father died in a mine explosion. And of course, like his dad is sitting there, and the nurses are coming in and out of the room, and I like read that, and I'm like, okay. I am not a nice person.
Maybe not the best book, but
it was on the list of ones that we wanted to read together eventually. So not the best timing.
Not anymore.
He has no interest.
You had lost interest, at that point. But you also probably didn't have much of a choice. I was going to say you couldn't communicate anything. No,
right.
He doesn't have memory of it, so I think we're good.
Yeah. I was going to say.
It hardly counts.
Yes. Now, so obviously the burns were severe. What was the prognosis? Like, how much of your body was burned? Was it 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree?
It was mainly 2nd and 3rd. Probably the majority was 3rd.
Yeah, I think they said deep 2nd, but mostly 3rd.
Okay.
And so they say like a total burn. So all the graft sites, they consider that part of the burn because they're taking the grafts.
Gotcha.
53-ish percent.
I think it was a little bit less than that. I think it was like 49 or something. But
50%.
50%.
Right.
I remember.
Yeah. Oh, we won't get into that debate. Yeah.
So,
but it was right around half or over.
Yeah, and the majority of it was his back and his like behind his legs from the top to the bottom.
From like my calves, up to my butt, and even some on there, and then my entire back. This whole, my left side, it kind of wraps around a lot of my right arm.
Your right arm is more than your left.
Yeah,
both hands.
Both hands were pretty bad. My wrists, my face. I didn't have any grafts on my face, or neck or anything like that, but my
Yeah.
face was badly burned. My ears were really bad.
Yeah.
Like like we said, no eyebrows or hair or.
Yeah, it's funny because when his hair grew back, it came in a little bit more gray. So
How convenient.
Yeah.
makes me feel better about mine.
Yeah. Maybe a little traumatic experience that you went through that maybe could have caused the gray.
Yeah.
Right.
But,
And then as far as like, the initial thoughts, they were saying, it could be 6 to 8 weeks, somewhere in that range in ICU, and then probably that much longer in a regular room. And then
before you'd be released
before
to
you'd
go
even be
home.
released to go home.
Yeah,
and
or
then
rehab.
or a rehab center of some
Yeah.
sort.
But that would have been in Pittsburgh as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, we were thinking, potentially months and
Yeah.
months of hospital care.
Yeah.
To do everything. I mean, he was having speech therapy and like they had to teach him how to swallow because he had had a feeding tube for so long. Mm-hmm. Physical therapy and occupational therapy and
speech therapy, like everything.
They just expected it to be a really, really long process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll talk about what then took place a little bit, moving forward. But so often when something like this happens, the initial response is, God, where were you? Like, why did you not prevent whatever it was that caused the explosion? Why didn't you, whatever it is, or whatever situation someone is going through, our natural instinct is the question, God, why didn't you prevent this tragedy from happening? Talk us through a little bit of how that was in the beginning. And then when did it transition to see that not only was God not absent, but he was very present in this whole thing and even went before you in this?
So finding out about the accident that morning, I'm going through just a whole gamut of emotion. And like you're saying, go ahead.
Yeah, and not just going through the whole gamut of emotion, but your best friend and spouse, you couldn't even, like, who it took place to, you couldn't process with him.
Right.
You could,
right.
So there was a time where it was very different, and even when you came to, you couldn't communicate.
No.
And that just the frustration must have been crazy. But sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine. So you're right. And not something that I think about very often, but like the person that I would normally talk to about these feelings or these doubts or these emotions, like, I can't get a hold of him. I mean, I tried calling like 12 times.
Yeah.
But obviously he wasn't available to answer.
So did everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was going through it and, I just remember being at our house. And while I waited for my mom to come up to take care of Wes, and we couldn't do anything. I couldn't go anywhere. Just like, really confused. We didn't know what had happened. And I'm trying to call different people that, like, this guy that works down at the Conneaut Lake office, this manager down there, I'm like calling him and trying to get, what did Trev sound like on the phone? What did he say? And all of that, just to figure out, like, is he even alive? Like, at this point, like, it's been, I didn't hear about it until at least an hour after it happened. And so at this point, I have no idea. I don't know where he's at other than that he's at Hammett or he's headed to Hammett. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of emotions with that. And it was like a mourning process of like what I imagine would be like when you lose your spouse, because I didn't know if he was alive or not.
Yeah.
And so, I remember like laying on the bathroom floor, like couldn't feel my legs from like at all. Like I couldn't stand up anymore. The grief was just so much. Thankfully Wes was napping at the time and I didn't have to entertain an almost 1-year-old at the same time.
Yeah.
But, and just like screaming, like actually screaming to God, like, where are you and why is this happening? And please just save my husband. Like, I don't care what happens. Please save my husband. I'll give up whatever it is. And I know my rational mind knows that that's not how this works.
Yeah, but we get into swapping and like, hey, if you do this for me, then I'll do, try to exchange stuff.
Yes, it was grief. And,
yeah.
And I, couldn't process really. And panicking too, like, what does this look like for our future? Which I'm just an overthinker anyway. And so you like, you like put that on me.
I am an underthinker.
Yeah. So that's one of the many reasons why you make such a great pair and balance each other out.
So, yeah, I had those feelings for sure of like, what is going on? Like, God, why would you let this happen? Like, why us? Why our family? Like, our son is so young. We've only been together for, a couple years at this point. And, are we strong enough to come through this? And I think I even had a moment where I was like, I'm 20, however old I was at the time, 28. Like, I can't be a widow and a single parent at 28. Like, this is not fair to me at all. Which is, I look back on it and I'm like, man, I really didn't need to feel all of that, because we see the outcome and we know how God was present in all of it. But yeah, in the moment, it's
still
just,
human reaction in the moment, though.
It's a natural human reaction, and we praise God for the outcome. As people are listening, they realize that obviously, like, you made it and all that stuff. But,
he's alive.
But there's so many other situations of people that love God deeply that don't turn out like that.
Yeah.
And so it is a natural thing to go through and question.
Yeah. And something that we had talked about, and I talked with my mom a lot about too, is like, I'd never really had anything in my life that had been hard, like soul crushing, faith shaking hard. I, of course, everybody goes through their breakups and their difficult situations and a job that didn't work out or whatever. And in the moment that felt like it's the end of the world, like everything's crashing in on me. But like, this was a whole nother level of things that I never could be prepared for, probably. Now I know we can come through it, and we would be better at it if this ever happened again. Please don't let it happen again.
Yeah.
But so you don't. There's no way to prepare for it, and I did have, you're right, like a natural reaction of like why, God, why is this happening? And that didn't go away. I mean, it took a long time for that to truly fade away.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot more to this. It wasn't just like this one thing that happened and then like everything is just uphill and sunshiny and rainbows, right? Like, there were multiple surgeries and each one was just considered as dangerous as the one before. So it was a long process. But that night we had realized that there were a lot of like things that had occurred during the day that just like didn't make sense unless it was God that was orchestrating it.
Yeah.
And so I remember when I found out those things on the drive home from the hospital that night, thinking to myself, like, okay, like, God has his hand in this and he's brought us through the first 24 hours almost. And I can see him moving. I can see him working. And, maybe this is going to be okay. Yeah. And so it took the first day.
Yeah.
And I would say that's only because we had people working behind the scenes getting us this information and prayers being answered behind the scenes to help us realize that, like, yeah, God really has his hand in this. Like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And so often when a traumatic, shocking, unexpected experience like this happens, for me at least, it takes me a second to remember this didn't surprise God.
Yeah.
None of this is catching him off guard.
Yeah.
Like, none of this is, like, he goes before us and everything he knows all, but we just don't remember that all the time. And so I'd love for you guys to talk through a couple of those things that some people might look at and be like, oh man, you were lucky. Or, oh, what a great coincidence. And there's no other explanation except for the fact that God did go before you in this.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on, Travis, on his your one worker's truck battery being dead that morning. He had been texting me and saying, like, I'm so frustrated. Like, these people aren't going to have propane. Obviously, pre-accident.
Yeah.
He was texting and saying, they're not going to have propane and they're going to run out of heat. And it's a Monday. This is going to put us behind for the whole week, and just really bogged down by it. And then that evening I had found out that he had come back just in time. And Travis had already said this. He'd come back just shortly after the explosion, got Trav in the ambulance or in the truck and drove him to the ambulance.
Yeah.
That ended up intubating him in time before his, throat had closed and he had lost his airway.
Speak through that. So there was no internal burning, but there was what was happening to your airways that if you would have stayed at the site until the ambulance would have gotten there, things would have been very different.
So there's some discrepancy because what Travis remembers is different than what I've been told.
Okay.
Travis remembered them saying, like, we're going to do this just as a precaution so we don't lose your airway. But again, he doesn't know if
that was
if they were just trying to not have you panic.
Yeah, like if they're gonna say his airway's closing and I'm already in this much trauma, like I might just have a panic attack.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they very well could have just been like, wink.
Yeah.
Just tell him that, but in reality, it was. I don't know.
And my understanding was because of the trauma of what had happened to his body's response, it was just like everything about his body was just shutting down, basically closing up.
With that much burn, with that much traumatic shock, with everything that happened.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I mean, I know this is a very minor thing compared to everything else, but were your ears just ringing? Like, was it, of all the things that, I don't know why this comes into my head, but like, it had to be a loud explosion.
Yeah, it was. It's
again, nothing compared to the burn. It's like,
right.
I don't even know why my mind goes there, but.
And it was, I don't remember hearing anything, but I just remember as I exited the building, I remember, almost like that, like you hear in a movie, that like muffled ringing sound. And I'm
like
sure that
everything else is blocked out because because of the explosion, your ears aren't functioning right now.
Right. And I'm sure that there was a little bit of that, but I don't remember dwelling on that. I just kind of remembered being in so much pain that I didn't really consider any of my other...
when you see both hands on fire, usually you don't think about your ringing ears.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that you guys were made aware of, that had it been longer, had he been there the whole time and waited for the ambulance to get on site, who knows if they could have intubated him in time with his airways closing up.
Yeah, and there's like another layer to that too, because then the other two guys that were involved, the ambulances came to the site, took them to a nearby airport.
It's like a
private runway.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
And they brought the life flights in for them. They actually got life flighted to New York, to Buffalo.
Okay.
And New York was still on very strict COVID lockdowns.
Yeah.
So they were allowed no visitors the whole time that they were in the hospital. And so, but because Travis was able to leave the scene and they took him to Hammett first, Hammett flew him to
Mercy
Pittsburgh.
because that's
UPMC.
They're
that's
within
UPMC and in network.
And so because he stayed in Pennsylvania and didn't go over the border into New York, he was able to have visitors every day. So it would have been a much different, I think, healing process for him too, had he not been able to have myself or his family members or whoever in to visit him.
And could you imagine you and the rest of the family, what it would have been like for you guys if you weren't allowed to go?
Oh no.
Yeah.
I would have been mad. Some of the other two guys, they tried to get transferred in different things at different times too, because
Pennsylvania woman breaks into New York hospital with I shouldn't make a joke about that.
No, but I'm sure that's how those other families were feeling, and I'm grateful that again, had he not left the scene first, he wouldn't have made it in and stayed in Pennsylvania and we wouldn't have been able to be there for him. But yeah, so anyway, so he gets to this ambulance, and I'm finding this out after the fact, that there were typically, this is how it's explained to me. I don't have any medical background or understanding of this. So I could be totally off, but this is how my brain comprehends it.
Yeah, and you were going by the information given to you by the professionals.
Yes. So they would normally have 2 EMTs, one to drive and one to treat the patient in the back of the ambulance. And for whatever reason, and this is not typical from what I've been told, but they would, this specific ambulance had a third person on board, which happened to be a nurse. And so because of that, as his throat was closing, the nurse was able to help intubate him en route to the hospital. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Because with one EMT by themselves, from what I'm told, that kind of would have been it on the side of the road right there. So, that's not, it's not, I mean, it sounds ironic, but it's not coincidence. It's not irony.
Yeah.
It's God clearly, like, for whatever reason, putting that nurse in that ambulance that day, making that truck battery die, or, whatever led up to the truck battery dying, and having his worker be there to drive him to that ambulance. And, just really, when I found that out, that's where I started to be like, okay, wait a minute, God's in this. I don't need to be as angry, and I don't need to be as scared, because, he's already helped through this, and this. So why would he just stop now?
Yeah. And it's also an interesting thing on perspective, because I'm right there with you. I would have been irritated at the fact that the truck battery died. And like you said, it was 5 degrees out. Like, these people need their propane. Like, all the different things would have went that way. I mean, to the point that you even text her like, man, things just aren't going well to start.
Yeah.
And then to look back and have that perspective of like, yeah, like, God, you were going before in ways that I didn't recognize, and now I do. How has that helped to possibly change your perspective? Not that you're perfect at it, okay? But how has that helped change your perspective on everyday occurrences, that maybe would have set you off? Set you off maybe is a little strong, but like would have really been an irritation. Has that helped you at all as you move forward to walk through those things?
I think so. I've told Erika this many times. I probably told her this today even, but like, I don't really, most of my anxiety, well, probably majority of my anxiety is about work. I don't ever feel anxious about her and Wes. I don't really feel anxious about like our finances and things like that around the house, because like, I trust her. I don't have to, I don't have any worry there.
Yeah.
And I don't have to worry about that. It feels like all my anxieties are about work, and trying to, no matter how many times I change this up or do this, if something's broke, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And so since then, I feel like I've been able to just give that to God more easily. Mm-hmm. I have to give it to him over and over and over that day or whatever, because those things still happen. I mean, those things happen, every week during the winter, because
absolutely
where we live, the equipment that you're running, it's hard on it to be out in the weather like that. And so, I feel like it's been a little bit easier for me to continue to give that to God because of what we've been through, and we made it through all that with God's help. And so like, it's one day, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Everything else feels like a minor inconvenience.
Yeah,
in the long run.
exactly.
But he's much better at that than I am. I just think, he's a much more clear-minded, level thinker, or whatever the phrases are here. But, he can think through those things and process that better. I'm a much higher anxiety person. So I think that the way that this situation has helped with me is giving him that perspective to throw back to me, not at me by any means, but like, hey, Erika, like, we went through this and God did not leave us. So why would he choose to just abandon us now?
Yeah.
Even if it's not the outcome that we want, or even if it doesn't feel like it's great, like 2 thumbs up and sparkly, like, it's still God's plan. And, look at where we came from and look at what we walked through, and God was beside us the whole way. So why would he stop now is basically the perspective that we've kind of taken on, and try to do with Wes, or try to teach Wes as well, because he was involved in all this, even though he has no memory of it, thankfully.
Thankfully.
He's involved in all this, and that's an example that we want to lead by for him as well.
Yeah. And so obviously what was important your life was spared.
Yeah.
By no means has that meant that the last 2.5 years have been without ups and downs and obstacles and surgeries and therapies and all that stuff. And so through that, you guys have alluded a little bit, because the expectation was you were going to be in the hospital for up to 4 months,
Yeah.
Including rehab and all that stuff. So where have you seen God walk with you through the ups and downs, and how have you seen him really be there with you, even if he doesn't, even if he's not the genie that you rub the bottle and get your wish, you know, or he's not the vending machine where you put in your prayer and push exactly what you want and it comes out, you know. But how have you still seen that he has been with you through all of it?
Probably just for me, like how fast I was able to heal. I don't know exactly like how many days in, but I just remember we've talked about this before, that they had me up and walking.
Yeah.
In the first week.
In the first week. And, you know, physical therapy and occupational therapy, some of those first sessions were like, sit up, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And like literally just sitting from there to there it's hard to explain, but it's the most terrible feeling in the entire world when you're that like your skin's that compromised. Yeah. And then trying to like swing your legs over and get out of bed and do those different things. And, you know, I just remember the first time, you know, getting out of bed and walking, and then like walking out. I didn't even know what it looked like outside my room. So walking, and it's like for the first time I'm seeing like the whole triage center and all that, and the nurses and doctors are clapping for me, and then I'm down walking the hallway, and Erika, she's just showing up and seeing me walk, and just like seeing her face light up.
Yeah, well, it was the first week. Like the accident was on a Monday. It was like Friday, maybe Saturday, maybe I don't remember which day. But I walked in to burn ICU, and he's walking towards me, and I'm like, okay, like you don't do that. Like science says you don't do that.
Yeah. They told you very much that he wouldn't do that
Correct.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, like so it's. You know, they were defying what they had said already.
Yeah. Well, and like Travis had said earlier, they predicted 6 to 8 weeks just in ICU alone, plus multiple weeks of rehab.
Yeah.
And he didn't need it. And that is not, I mean, that was you. You did a great job.
I'm stubborn.
But that was not of us. That was not because of science. And we owe so much to those doctors, and that is not at all to downplay what the doctors and the nurses and the therapists did for him. But it doesn't happen that way. Like science says it doesn't happen that way. And God says, well, I don't have to listen to that. And that was amazing.
Yeah.
That, I mean, he ended up doing 3 weeks in ICU, which was half of the lower end of what they had anticipated. And then 1 week on just like a regular recovery floor.
Yeah.
And they released him. And he actually walked himself out of the hospital, which...
They're like, no, we need to put you in
4 weeks after the accident?
Yeah, yep.
They're like, we need to put you in a wheelchair. We're going to wheel you out. I'm like, no. And she's like, you might as well just stop. He's got it in his head. Yeah. He's going to walk out even if he's...
Yeah, I was going to say, no matter what. Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, it was amazing. And, you think back on it and you're like, those things they don't just happen. And you see these, you talk to people. Thankfully, we're very much surrounded by people who are believers and celebrate those victories with us. But you talk to people, like we went to his first doctor's appointment after the what's it called? When he was discharged.
Discharge, yeah.
Yeah. And she's like, yeah, I expected you to be in here in a wheelchair, like not able to move.
Yeah.
And Travis, I think you even said like, well, God is working a miracle here, basically.
Yeah.
Like God is healing me.
And sometimes the doctors would be like, oh, okay. And then others would be like,
yeah,
well, whatever they're doing, tell them to keep doing it. That type of comment.
Say a couple prayers for me, too, kind of
thing. Yeah,
thing.
that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so speak to the power of prayer. I'm sure there's probably been times in your life where people have rallied around and prayed for you for whatever the situation was, or you've been part of something. But I have to believe that, no traumatic experience in this regard you said had happened in your life up until this point. I'm not sure if you would say...
I mean, other than, in 2007, seeing my dad.
Yeah, your dad went through it. So
he was I can't remember what his percentage was, but he was burned. So I had a little bit of idea, what that looked like. But other than that, I mean, it was no threat to his life.
Yeah.
It was terrible, but it was
Absolutely,
at no point. But other than, seeing some grandparents go through surgeries and we're like,
yeah,
they may or may not make it through the surgery, and you're praying and they do. But we had so many people come up to us all over the place, and they're like, how do I know you? And then we tell them, oh, we prayed for you, and
when you say all over the place, explain that.
Yeah, well,
because it was literally all over the globe.
Yes, yeah, we had missionaries and like church plants that we that had heard about this story on like other continents, praying for Travis and for Wes and I and our family, and just through different relatives and friends. It really like what's spiderwebbed fingered. I don't know what it's out into like
ripple effect.
Yeah,
out.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah,
out into the world, and we saw support from a lot of places, and that's not us. That's nothing that we did. Like I updated on Facebook, and people shared, and that was people sharing our story, and people praying for us, and to see the effects of that come back to us in the way that it worked. Truly for Travis and for myself, it was amazing to see.
And it was just humbling to be in public or wherever we were, and seeing people and they're in tears because they see me and they're like, we prayed for you, and God answered our prayers. You're here, you're playing with your son, you're camping, you might be uncomfortable, but you're here. And it's just a very humbling thing for those prayers to be answered, and for people to feel that they can share that and tell about that. And people were sending cards. I come home from the hospital and Erika's like, are you ready to look through some of these? And and it just sit there, and I could only handle maybe 5 or 10 at a time, and I'm just bawling because of the things that people were sharing, and people saying, we had this extra money, we didn't know what to do with it, but God told us to give it to you. And like how I can never pay that back. And it's like, it's just a constant reminder for me that like I can't pay God back for what he's done for me. It's a free gift, and you just accept it, and it just can't, there's just nothing I can do to be able to repay that or to be able to give that back. And it's just kind of a cool thing to see.
Absolutely. And it had to be such a great reminder as you walked through that experience of not just that God is going to provide, but that maybe even, looking for opportunities of how is God going to use us to come along other people, like that might be going through something similar, that you can, you always say like, like if you're a good friend, you can be there for someone. And that's true. But like I met with another local pastor, and we were just sharing through life and ministry and all this stuff. And there's a reality of, to some extent, like if you go through the same thing or similar, you can understand so much differently. I won't say more, even though really it is kind of more, but you can understand differently. And so I'm not sure if this has happened, but has there been an instance since the accident where you've been able to step up and either in a moment or in a few different moments really walk with someone because you actually know what they're going through because you guys have been through it?
I don't know if I have specific moments necessarily. I've shared our story a couple different times, a couple different like women's events, spoken and shared our story there. And it's funny after the fact how many people want to tell you their story. And to be able to hear, and thankfully a lot of these places that I've shared have been through church. or through different churches in the area. So they're able to share like how God has touched their lives. And it's cool to hear that too, to see that perspective, or that the same perspective that we see through other people's eyes. It's been really cool. I will say, like, sometimes things hit differently now, like emotionally. I had a coworker just lose her husband a couple weeks ago. And I said to Travis, you know, through tears, of course, you know, I feel that, like, I know that initial reaction because I mourned the loss of my husband, even though I didn't lose him. When I didn't know what was going on, I kind of, you know, I went through some of that grief. So I know some of what she's walking through, and it's not a good feeling. And you know, so I have some of that, but I wouldn't say that I've ever like reached out and acted upon that or anything like that, other than through prayer for her, or for other people in situations that are, you know, going through similar things.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I haven't really talked to anybody that's been, you know, in the exact same situation, but because I've been in a situation like that, people will tell me like, oh yeah, you've been through some terrible things. And then they'll like offload what they're going through. And I feel like, you know, I went back to work for a reason, at the same place for a reason. Mm-hmm. It's not fun every day. Some days I'm scared. Some days I'm anxious about being there. Some days I'm like, why am I still, why am I still doing this? Middle of winter and it's hectic. And I'm like, why am I still here?
You get a report a car battery died. You're just like, God, is this like, like what?
What's my timeline?
I'm sick.
Like I can't make it in today.
Yeah. But like, you know, a lot of the guys that I work with, a lot of them are not Christians.
Yeah.
Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. But I don't think there's one of them that is like against God. They've had some bad things happen in their life. They don't know why it's happened. They don't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And they're just searching. They're searching for some sort of something to make them feel whole. And they don't know what it is. So they come to me with their problems and they tell me, and they're like, how did you get through it? And I tell them, I just have to constantly give it to God every single day. I said, it's not always great coming in here. You know, often and I'm sharing this with them, often I'm anxious or often, you know, whatever it is. And I said, you know, I'm listening to Christian music on the way in because it's the only thing that keeps it keeps me focused on the way in there about how my day should go. Yeah. And I'm in prayer on the way and I'm listening to Christian music on the way home. So I don't take the problems home and be ornery with Wes when he's 3.
Yeah, I was going to say when he's just a typical, you know, little boy who's got a ton of energy, which is beautiful. But if you've had a long day at work, it might not, you know. And
I'm not perfect at that. You can ask Erika. There's often days where I'm just like, I just want to get home and hop on the mower and not talk to anybody. Yeah. And she's gracious with that too. Yeah. But, you know, just this is kind of a rabbit trail. But Jerry Hills gave us this, was it a videotape?
It was a DVD.
It was a DVD of a guy who was in Vietnam, had all this suffering and pain because of a napalm grenade exploding. Yeah. And he said he used that because the universal language that everyone understands is pain. Yeah. And so, you know, I thought, you know what? It doesn't really matter what my pain was or anybody else's pain was. Everybody understands what that looks like. Yeah. And, you know, you can kind of, you know, people can sympathize with that and you can be there for them to help them through whatever that looks like for them. Mm-hmm. You know, it might not be an explosion, but it might be a issue with their wife or, you know, whatever it may be.
And like you said, so many people, what a privilege. I know in the moment we don't always view it as a privilege, but what a privilege that those that are lost come to you and ask advice knowing full well where you go. Yeah. Yeah. And they still do.
Like and I realize that's why you wanted us to share and whatnot, but like we're doing this Esther study. Yeah. And, you know, I feel like the biggest theme in this whole book is like Mordecai saying to her, like, maybe this is why you're put in place for this. And, you know, in the moment, in the first...
Are you sure you don't want to pick somebody else?
In the first, you know, couple weeks that he's in the hospital, we're like, we don't know what this looks like in the future, but what if this is God's plan for us? Like, what if this Travis being able to be that ear for those guys at work that need that are desperate for somebody just to listen, that understand the pain that Travis has been through, and they know that he's a safe person as in a manager position, that they can trust him, so it's been a good reflection of, what Esther was doing in the book of Esther, what Mordecai was doing, to see that in our lives too, to see that play out, and have those conversations with each other to say, like, this may be why God did this in our lives.
And my dad has said different times too, that it wasn't just, this didn't just, help our relationship or Erika and my relationship with God. It was everybody who prayed for me, that saw me healed and saw me come through all that and fight through all that. Like, God, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. No.
God there was a plan for their life that was all attached to this. Yeah. And God had a plan for whatever they were going through, whether it's to build them up or for, whatever it may be. But, God had a plan for everybody who was involved in that, everybody who prayed. God touched their life as well.
To utilize this situation to strengthen their faith.
Yeah.
And to grow them closer to Him. So there were obviously some difficult times. You mentioned like your faith being shaken, and which is just natural. I mean, there are times where stuff like this happens and it just shipwrecks people's faith. Through those hard times, what were some of the verses that God kept bringing back to you that you really relied on, of like, okay, God, I trust that the promises in your word are true, and I'm struggling to believe this, but I'm going to stake claim that this promise of your word is true in this situation. So what are some of the scriptures that you really relied on and still do?
I mean, I'm going to forget what the passage is. But
I just had to pull up my Bible app. We should have brought our notes with us.
Yeah. But be anxious for nothing. That verse.
Philippians 4,
6 and 7?
Yeah.
And, I kind of took that on as my own verse. But my mother-in-law and my father-in-law literally stayed with us. Yeah. Because when I got home from the hospital, it wasn't like everything was okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I still had to take like a shower every day that took an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't, I'm like pat drying. I couldn't, just any tiny little bit of friction on my skin was like enough to send me through the roof. And so Erika's helping me with that.
Not to mention the damage it would do.
Well, right.
Like the pain must have been excruciating, but then the damage of it. Yeah.
And so Erika's parents, basically raised Wes for the month that I was in the hospital, and then they stayed with us during the week. And my parents came over on the weekends just to like help with Wes, so she could help me put lotion on that took an hour three times a day, and take a shower that took an hour. Yeah, we still got tubs of it. So
over and over, yeah.
And it's just like over and over and over and over and over again. And my mother-in-law, almost every day it seemed, would say that verse to me.
Huh.
And so I'm just kind of like, well, I guess that's mine now. So, so that's kind of just stuck with me. And then, to get me through those days of being at home and everything continuing to heal and going to physical therapy and trying to get my strength back. I mean, I laid in a hospital bed for a month, and then I basically sat at home in a chair other than when I was going to therapy the rest of the time. So like I was probably about the same weight, but I had like zero muscle left on my body. And so,
and not to mention, how many surgeries / procedures have you gone through so far?
He had 2 in the hospital. Those were
probably 3.
3 in the hospital. Those were the major ones.
Okay.
Those like initial, like taking the skin for the grafts.
Yeah.
Putting the grafts on, all that. But then since then, the scarring, it scars up and it kind of bubbles out and everything like that. And I think 7 or 8 of those laser procedures, and every single one of those
are pretty painful.
Yeah. Whenever they explained it to me, they're like, it's a bad sunburn. And I'm like, I don't think.
Yeah, you're like, I'm sorry, that's not true.
I'm not much for sunscreen. I've been burned before. And so
it's inaccurate.
Yeah. The first few times that I came back from those, it was like, I'm basically sobbing, telling Erika that like, not from the pain, but just like I feel like I'm back at the hospital again. I feel like I
Yep.
made it this far, and now I'm just 6 weeks back to where I was
Set
before.
you back so much.
And I'm probably too much information, but like sticking to my bed, trying to get up in the morning, and just like,
absolutely,
we got to put like pads down to protect everything, and it's just it just wears on you mentally.
Yeah.
And so I guess circle all the way back. that's kind of how I
Philippians
just
4
rely on that verse every day,
Yeah.
and continue to, even that, now that I'm back to work,
Yeah.
I continue to rely on that verse to kind of get me through.
And not that I want to take a deep dive into the politics of his accident, but it's a work-related accident. So there are workers' comp related hoops that we had to jump through. And so he's miserable from all of these extra laser surgeries. We don't have the option of saying no, because if we choose to say no, then there's the potential that they won't continue to support him in the future with other, surgeries.
If I have complications 20 years down the road.
Yeah.
Right.
And
they
you
may be
have
like, well,
to do everything they say now, so that because I remember having that phone conversation of a variety of different things you guys are wrestling through, and one of it was like, if anything comes up that we don't have any clues going to happen 20 years from now, if I don't do all this stuff, then we got to pay out of pocket for these six-figure procedures.
Exactly. Exactly.
So there, that kind of weighed into it too, with that mental conversation. Like, Travis may have wanted to say, like, I don't want to do this. Like, I just want to have a 6-month period of no pain for the first time in months, years.
Yeah.
And, he didn't have that option. And so, he's saying that verse to himself because it truly is continuing to keep him going.
Yeah.
Even now, too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that, he shared with me just as we were prepping for this, that he feels like people prayed for him to not have those anxieties and things when he was in the hospital initially, to kind of block that from his mind, because he could easily go into a dark place. He's on a lot of medication. He could easily, I don't know, not to make light of it, but easily end up falling into an addictive,
because most of the stuff they're giving me is literally like medical grade narcotics.
Absolutely.
And so it very easily, there were some other people that were in the room next to me that were having issues with that.
Yeah.
As like a little kid having an issue with that. And it's like, small town Pennsylvania, meth is everywhere. And that's basically what they were giving me as a pain medication. And so I was like, they're like, well, we need to, when we're doing these dressing changes, your baseline is too low for us to be able to control that during those dressing changes. But I'm like, but when I'm just sitting here, I don't want to be.
You don't want to be drugged up.
Yeah. Like, I want to be able to have a conversation with Erika without falling asleep every 4 seconds, which happened often.
Yeah.
to wake up and start the same story over again.
Yeah, there's a lot of repeating. That's okay.
Oh, man.
But he had shared recently, like I said, that he felt like people prayed that would not become a stumbling block for him, that the fear and the anxiety would not become a stumbling block for him. And again, that's like another prayer that God answered behind the scenes that we didn't see until much later on, that, Trav still has some anxiety related to his job and the hazardous materials that he uses or has to be around.
Yeah.
But it's like nothing compared to what some of the other people that were involved in the accident are going through. Yeah. And I know that's because of the power of prayer, because people were praying for Trav from the beginning for this.
For sure. Bible verse for you that you have turned to a lot through this.
Yeah, we did, and I kind of shared this a little bit on Sunday, but we did a devotional leading up to this for years. Since we've been married, every night together in bed. And the day after the accident was on January 31st. It was February 1st. I took our devotional down with me to the hospital to read it to Travis, even though he was not really with it at all. Mm-hmm. And the title of that day's devotion was Don't Be Afraid. And the verse was Matthew 10, 29 through 31. And it says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are wow, you are of more value than many sparrows. Mm-hmm. And, what great perspective, literally the day after this happened, that, God loves us so much more than all of these other wonderful things around us. He's not going to leave us, and we don't need to be afraid of what's to come, because he's with us through it. And that was good perspective. And we have since, every year on the day of the accident, kind of chosen to celebrate it almost like a birthday again, for Travis, and a family day. And he takes off work and we make it a big thing. And, that verse comes up in our devotional. We read a different devotional now, but that following year we were still rereading that devotional.
Yeah.
And, that was the 1 year anniversary. Was like, oh yeah, like, remember this is where we were a year ago. And this is the verse that God chose when the people wrote that book to put it in, knowing that, like, hey, someday that's going to benefit us. And I can't imagine who else it's benefited. I'm sure a lot of people, but
absolutely.
It was cool to see.
Yeah. And I think it's, again, there. I had a pastor in the Dominican, Pastor Silverio, who, one of my first missions trips down to the Dominican, I said something about it's a coincidence. And through translation, I still remember how serious he got. And he said it in Spanish. I don't know Spanish, but I knew whatever he was saying was serious. And it was simply, there are no coincidences with God. Yeah. And so just the little step of, or huge step, however you want to look at it, of you guys having that devotional to then, not that it, put all your anxieties to the side, but just to remember that very next day, do not be afraid, and to point to the promises of his scripture and just how crucial that is. Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for the conversation. It's great to hear the story, and I've been able to hear it throughout our time of getting to know each other, and I think it's truly, I know how much it's blessed me. And so I'm excited for how God's going to use this in ways that we will hear feedback on, and ways that we will never know. Yeah. But thank you for being faithful and sharing and giving, some insight of what you guys, have gone through in these last 2.5 years. And Wes is going to be a big brother.
Yes.
Yep. How soon?
September.
Okay. I was going to say, I knew there were still a few months, but.
Which, another thing that we say as a God thing is, we had our first appointment about this baby on the 2-year anniversary.
On February 1st.
It was on
January
31st. Yep, was when we found out we were having another baby.
We thought we were, and then we went there, and they're like, "Yep, there's a heartbeat." And so
we were like,
"That is crazy."
Talk about celebrating life.
Yeah,
we found out the same day. So
because we were worried, because we had tried for a while, and all the medications I had to take, and a lot of the side effects are that.
Yeah.
And so.
Confirming
we were getting a little bit frustrated with that, and then boom, God says, "You know what? I'm going to make this day even better."
Yeah.
And we got it confirmed that we were going to have a baby on January 31st.
Yeah.
That's great. So we're excited for that, and I know Wes is pretty pumped.
Yes.
Right.
A little depends on the day because it's a girl. But
well, that's he'll be okay with it.
He says it's okay because she'll play Barbies and I don't have to share my cars.
Yeah. I love little kids' truth and just their
you never
honesty.
have to guess what he's thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why. Oh, that was great when he started walking with me Sunday morning, and I'm like, "Oh, you going with me now, Wes?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I still don't know who, but he's like, "I got to show these people my new cars."
Yep.
Because he had some cars, and I'm like, "Huh." I'm not sure where we're going, but yeah, he's got someone to show the cars to. Yep. And it was good. He was on a mission. But thank you guys again for sharing.
I
want to thank everyone who has had the opportunity to listen to this. I want to encourage you to continue to look in your lives and see in small and big ways how God's hand of providence has gone before you, and his sovereign plan is what is going to take place no matter what happens around us in this world, and he's the one that's in control. I want to thank you for joining us on the Federated Squared Circle, Wrestling with God's Word. We'll see you next week.